So ever since I started really getting involved in the Star Wars fandom, ever since I started really getting involved in this YouTube space, started talking to a lot of different fans with a lot of different opinions, a lot of different philosophies on where Star Wars should go, a lot of people have some very interesting and very wrong viewpoints, in my opinion, on where Star Wars should go, on the type of content that they should make, on the type of content that they should be making these stories on, stuff like this. Star Wars is quietly replacing the Jedi. Now, I just completely disagree with that statement. I completely disagree, not that they're not doing it, I completely disagree that they should do that. But a lot of people out there are trying to tell me that Star Wars does not need to be about Jedi, that Star Wars does not need to be about Force users. Now, you're trying to tell me that if you're watching A New Hope in 1997 or 1977, excuse me, if you're watching A New Hope and you don't see, let's say that's the same exact story, but there is no Jedi, there's no Luke Skywalker, there's no Force, there's no lightsabers like you see right here, that you're going to have the same draw to that next movie. They're going to have the same draw to The Empire Strikes Back. No. Star Wars is always about the Jedi. Star Wars has always been about the Jedi, or at least some type of Force user. In particular, it's been the Jedi for the last few decades. Ever since Star Wars started, it's been about the Jedi. Star Wars under George Lucas was about the Jedi. Even Dave Filoni himself, George Lucas's apprentice, like I said a million times, I don't agree with everything that Dave Filoni has done. I think he's done some very shady things inside of Star Wars. I think he's made some very poor decisions inside of Star Wars. But he knows Star Wars. He worked directly under George Lucas. He's the closest thing to an apprentice that George Lucas has ever had. And Dave Filoni has made some great Star Wars content as well. He knows Star Wars better than anyone else working at Lucasfilm right now. And probably better than a lot of the Star Wars fans out there that claim to be lore experts. I'm sure Dave Filoni knows more than anyone other than George Lucas, right? But he can still make some bad decisions in terms of Star Wars storytelling, which he has. He's also made some great ones though. This is one of the great ones that he's made. Dave Filoni has said himself that Star Wars is and always has been about the Jedi. And it always will be about the Jedi. But a lot of Star Wars fans out there try to tell me, and a lot of Disney Star Wars employees like Kathleen Kennedy, they try to make these movies like Rogue Squadron, like Andor, that aren't about Jedi, like Rangers of the New Republic, things that just aren't about Jedi and probably won't have too many Force users in them, and it just doesn't draw my attention. It just doesn't get my attention, and that's exactly what this article is talking about. Star Wars is quietly replacing the Jedi. That's not what you need to do. I mean, a lot of fans do say that they want that, but at the end of the day, those projects, that content is not going to make as much money as something like a Luke Skywalker show would make, as something like Ahsoka show would make, or even The Mandalorian now that we have Baby Yoda in it. I was extremely worried about The Mandalorian when it first got announced, when we first saw those trailers, because no one knew that Baby Yoda was going to be in the show. We didn't know that we were going to have a Force user in that show. But as soon as Baby Yoda showed up, I kind of let out a sigh of relief. I was like, thank God. We have some type of Force user in the show. This show was just saved. For over 40 years, George Lucas' Star Wars universe has taken fans directly into the battle between good and evil by showing us two sides of the same Force, the Jedi and the Sith. Exactly. That's exactly what Star Wars is about. The Jedi versus the Sith, the light side versus the dark side. Force users. That's what we need. Stop making shows like Rogue Squadron. Stop making, or movies like Rogue Squadron. Stop making shows like Andor, like Rangers of the New Republic, like the Book of Boba Fett even. A lot of people love Boba Fett, but in my eyes, Star Wars is about Force users. We can have shows like Book of Boba Fett. I'm not saying don't give us any shows like the Book of Boba Fett or like a Dr. Aphra comic like you see right here. That's fine. But when you start having so many like Rangers, Andor, Book of Boba Fett, there's another one that I can't think of right now off the top of my head that's coming out soon. Lando, not about a Force user. That's not the way to go. That's not how you make money off of Star Wars. You push these Force users. That's how you make money off Star Wars. When I say that I don't hate the sequel trilogy, do you know why I don't hate the sequel trilogy? It's because it's extremely hard for me to hate Star Wars content where the Force Jedi lightsabers are present. It's extremely hard. I know that's extremely shallow. That's a dumb way of thinking. I understand that. But that's the truth. It's hard for me to watch a Star Wars movie, no matter how bad it's written, no matter how bad the overall story is throughout the trilogy. I 100% recognize that. But when there's lightsabers, when there's a Force user, and when there's Jedi present, when there's Sith or dark side users present, it's hard. It's hard for me to dislike that movie. Now, as the Star Wars franchise continues to expand and the Skywalker saga is officially over, the powers that be behind the Star Wars galaxy are quietly replacing the Jedi Order with a brand new character class. It all started with the 2015 introduction of Dr. Aphra in the Darth Vader comics. Dr. Chelly Lona Aphra is an archaeologist who has made herself indispensable to the iconic Sith Lord throughout the comic book series. Dr. Aphra is fine. It's totally fine. But you can't start making this Star Wars. Star Wars is about Jedi, lightsabers, Force users. You gotta keep that going. You gotta keep making shows like Ahsoka, like Kenobi. As Screen Rant noted, she's an archaeologist who has earned 2 series of her own, quickly becoming a fan favorite. A fan favorite, seriously. Luke Skywalker's a fan favorite. Anakin Skywalker's a fan favorite. Even Boba Fett, Din Djarin, fan favorites. Dr. Aphra, not so much. Not too much of a fan favorite. I would say most Star Wars fans don't even know who the hell Dr. Aphra is. As the history of the Star Wars galaxy is developed, she is also becoming more and more important. She has paved the way for archaeologists to be some of the coolest characters in the... What? Archaeologists are the coolest characters in Disney Star Wars. Is that a joke? Archaeologists allow the Star Wars universe to expand without relying on the knowledge that Jedi Knights have gathered over 1,000 generations. Come on, man. Instead of needing a character like the sequel trilogy's Rey to track down the most famous Jedi Luke Skywalker on Octo 2 to get information from an ancient Jedi temple, or the original trilogy needing Obi-Wan Kenobi / Old Ben to help young Luke find his path, an archaeologist can provide historical details about the galaxy simply because he or she has studied it. The thing is, this isn't the only way that they're getting rid of Jedi. They're just straight up phasing Jedi out. They're straight up phasing Force users out, and they're doing it in very clever ways. Like this article is saying, like they're making archaeologists the way to see the history of the universe, to where you don't need Jedi, you don't need this information that Jedi have accumulated over thousands of years. But the thing is, it's way more interesting when you hear it coming from a Jedi that has studied these books that are thousands of years old, that people have written in, that people have written history down for thousands of years. It's way more entertaining. It's way more interesting to see that than to just see an archaeologist, a random archaeologist like Dr. Aphra come in and tell us this history. It's way better to see someone like Old Ben, like Ben Kenobi, Obi-Wan Kenobi, whatever you want to call him. It's way more interesting to see an old wizard like that explain to Luke what Jedi were, explain to the audience who these Force users are, what the Force is. Moments like that are not given to us without Jedi, without Force users. Moments like whenever Obi-Wan was explaining to Luke how the Force works. Come on, man. We don't get that from Dr. Aphra. Nobody cares. In fact, one of the most common criticisms of the Star Wars sequels was that they focused too heavily on the original trilogy. What? The core cast, Mark Hamill, Carrie Fisher, and Harrison Ford, all returned and didn't move the galaxy into the future. You see, I think that a huge criticism of the sequel trilogy was that it didn't focus enough on the original trilogy. It put those characters in there, but like I said, it didn't really move the galaxy into the future. They didn't give them anything to do. All they gave them to do was die. They didn't give them much to do, and they didn't give them a moment together. I don't agree with that statement at all. But what I do agree with this article is that it's Star Wars is moving away from Jedi. Star Wars is moving away from Force users. I'm pissed about it. A lot of fans out there are advocating for it. I don't understand that much, and I think that they're going to regret it if they do get their wish. The quiet replacement of the Jedi as the main players in the galaxy has also opened the door for non-Jedi characters like Jon Favreau and Dave Filoni's Din Djarin from The Mandalorian to become an integral part of the Star Wars story. Although Djarin is inextricably connected to the Jedi Order because of Grogu, Luke Skywalker himself, and Ahsoka Tano, he doesn't personally know much about the Order or their past. That's exactly what I was afraid of whenever this show was announced. Whenever I saw the trailers for the show, I was like, there's an extreme lack of lightsabers, there's an extreme lack of Force users. Now, back in the day, they had this show called Rule of Two, right? With Mark Fernandez. I know a lot of you know him from Rule of Two on Theory's channel, but he actually had a show before that on Collider Live. They had these guys named Mark Fernandez and this other guy named Mark Riley. That's my favorite Star Wars show of all time was that show. And they described it perfectly before The Mandalorian was coming out, right? They described my worries perfectly. They said if The Mandalorian, if Star Wars is like McDonald's, the Force is like the Big Mac. McDonald's isn't McDonald's without the Big Mac. You need the Big Mac to make McDonald's. If the Big Mac just disappears off the menu, there's just gonna be a void there. It's just gonna feel very empty. It's gonna feel very strange. That's the same thing if The Mandalorian is McDonald's and the Force users are the Big Mac. If you have The Mandalorian with no Big Mac, if you have The Mandalorian with no Force users, this goes for every single Star Wars show out there. If you have a Star Wars show, Book of Boba Fett, with no Big Mac, with no Force users, it's going to feel very strange. It's going to feel very off. Now, I know all of these shows, I know that not every single one of these shows is going to have a Force user in it. I know that Book of Boba Fett, Rangers, if that show ever happens, Lando, and Andor, they're not all going to have a Force user in it. Well, some of them might, but not all of them. Some of them are going to be missing a Big Mac. And I'm very afraid of that. I'm very afraid that Star Wars is going in that direction. Rogue Squadron, probably not going to have any Force users in it. Maybe a small cameo. And I know you don't want to hear this, but that small cameo might very well be Rey. Might very well be. I think it probably will be. If we have a cameo, it's probably going to be Rey. I'm just saying that I'm getting very scared of the direction that Star Wars is going in. I think that a lot of Star Wars fans and Kathleen Kennedy, all the storyboard people, the head of the story groups, this is a bad choice. This is a bad direction to go in. Trying to phase out Force users and Jedi out of Star Wars is a bad choice. It's a bad direction. They need to adjust course. They need to change course. Go back towards the Force users. Go back towards Luke Skywalker heavy stuff. Do you think that Dr. Aphra or a random archaeologist could have the reaction that Luke Skywalker had in the Mandalorian finale? No. Only Force users can do that. I'm sorry. Only Force users in Star Wars can do that. Can have that type of reaction. And Star Wars fans will learn. Star Wars themselves will learn. Lucasfilm will learn. Kathleen Kennedy story group will learn. Once the numbers start dropping, when they start doing this non-Force user stuff, this non-Jedi stuff. But let me know what you guys think in the comments about everything that I talked about in this video. If you did enjoy this video, please leave a like on the video and subscribe to the channel. If you want to follow me on Twitter or join the Discord, both of those links will be in the description as well. Thank you for watching the video and hope to see you in the next one.